So just over a year ago, all the major shooting organisations put a statement out saying they wanted a 5-year transition period to voluntarily move away from lead shot. This is mostly driven by the sale of game. The big players who are selling game do not want to be selling venison and feathered game, fur and feathered game, that has been shot with lead. So a 5-year move away seemed intelligent, gave cartridge manufacturers time to change, gave shooters the time to get their heads around it. Generally, as a group of people, we don't like fast change. No one likes fast change, do they really? And that statement that was a year ago. COVID distracted us from that. Cartridge manufacturers all said nothing much could be done. However, they also then did quite a lot. And in the last year, we've seen great developments from all the major cartridge manufacturers for biodegradable wads and improved steel shot. However, yesterday, or 2 days ago, the National Gamekeepers Association just released a statement. This statement, which is the point of this entire video, says this. At the National Game Dealers Association annual general meeting, members voted to commit to sourcing all feather and fur game, as well as venison and wild boar, from lead-free supply chains from the 1st of August, July 2022. It goes on a bit, but the main point here is that if you sell the game that you shoot, or you go to shoots where they sell game to game dealers, that is effectively the end of you shooting lead at that shoot. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who keeps their finger on the pulse and listens to news and is in the know, because there has been rumours that certain game dealers have been wanting this last season. Certainly a lot of buyers wanted this last season. So if you consider this as like a 2-year extension, technically, it's more of a positive mindset. But to a lot of people, this is also a huge shock. We are not quite in the position yet where there is a viable quantity and a source of the right cartridges for us to go and use to replace lead shot. However, in a year's time, I see that might be a bit of a different situation, given how far we've come in a COVID year. So, what is the point in this video? Well, I've called upon all of our sources. I went and filmed with Tim Weston from the NGO, I filmed with Nick Horton and Simon Reinhold to get all of their thoughts from different aspects of using them, what it means for game shoots, and I even got a statement from a cartridge manufacturer about what their thoughts are on this. However, obviously this is all fresh news, so the reactions are still early days. But before we get on with the film, just a quick word from the sponsor of this video, who is Countryside Contests. They are the new Countryside competition raffle people on the block, and they have got some great competitions that you can go and check out at this website, countrysidecontest.co.uk. Their first competition, which they are launching today, is Back to the Clays. That's a £1,500 voucher to spend at Kibworth Gun Shop and Shooting Ground. It comes with a free lesson, a free gun fit, loads of stuff, accommodation, travel costs, clay shooting accessories. It's a good little package for someone new into shooting or even someone who's been doing it a while. Take your friends, have a great day out, go and make some memories. I remember shooting at Kibworth back along. It's a lovely, lovely ground. Go to the website, check them out, join the raffle. It's a great prize. And as an added incentive, they're giving 10% of their profits back to conservation projects. Great. Anyway, this is what the NGO said.
I'm Tim Weston from the National Gamekeepers Association. In light of a recent announcement by the National Game Dealers Association, the NGO would like to put some views across. The NGO was signatories last February to a letter that asked the shooting community to voluntarily phase out the use of lead shotgun cartridges over a 5-year period. A recent announcement by the National Game Dealers Association after a vote at their AGM has told us and everybody that from July 2022, game dealers are hoping to not take in any game, birds or venison shot with lead ammunition. This is their decision and a decision they have made for commercial reasons based on their customers' wants and will. The shooting organisations were hoping to have a more steadily controlled phased plan out working over a 5-year period of which we're only 1 year into. This plan included working with shooting community, people who actually shoot, the cartridge manufacturers and manufacturers of weapons and other ammunition, as well as the game dealers and the food sector. The National Gamekeepers Organisation, of course, supports a sustainable future for shooting and one that is environmentally friendly. After all, gamekeepers are the biggest group of conservationists out there who actually get on the ground and do the job. Finding an alternative to lead ammunition is a task that is already well underway, and massive strides have been made even in the last 12 months. A phased plan is always preferential to a knee-jerk reaction, but these things happen, and this is in no way pushed forward by legislation or the shooting organisations. It's a decision made by the food sector and the buyers of game. From today, game dealers for this coming season, this winter, are not asking for birds to be bought in shot with other compounds. Any compound at the minute that's legal will do. The requirement for some game dealers to have lead-free pheasants and deer will be officially, as the NGDDA said, in 2022. Some game dealers will be asking for birds and game shot earlier, and some will be later. So you need to have that conversation with your game dealer. Those of you who are still shooting for yourself for the pot and who are shooting small quantities that you consume yourself or give away to friends and family can of course use any compound. It must be stressed that at the minute it is only birds and deer that are going to AGHEs, approved game meat handling establishments, that have signed up to the National Game Dealers Association's requirement for lead-free game. Although a 5-year voluntary phase-out of lead shot was planned, the game dealers have taken the steps earlier, but this doesn't mean this is placed into legislation and law. This is still voluntary and will still depend on your game dealer. Gamekeepers have always strived to improve habitat and the environment, and have always found ways of improving what we're doing and making things better. By not using lead doesn't necessarily mean things are going to get worse. It means we're going to have to work in a slightly different way, and it's just something else to overcome that I'm sure as a sector we can do. It's worth remembering that the vast majority of our game shot in this country in terms of birds goes through AGHEs, approved game meat handling establishments. And it's also worth remembering that these establishments are there to support us and help us. Game dealers sell game, and it's the buyers of the game that dictate what they want to buy. In this instance, the buyers have dictated the fact that they would like to buy game that is lead-free, and the game dealers are able to supply that, and we're willing to do it too.
So I was entertained last night by watching the reaction to this, and it's very interesting to see different people's point of views. The biggest thing is that people saying that this is not enough time. A lot of other industries react very, very quickly. The thing that always gets me is that the cartridges, when it comes to game shooting, are probably the cheapest bit. Most shooters could change to bismuth if they don't want to shoot steel or tungsten, or in fact some of these other alloys that are coming to the fore that are £500, under £500 a thousand for a lead alternative that is not steel, bismuth or tungsten. There are other alternatives out there, and you could spend a little bit more money on your ammunition, and that would be the way that it is. And it's not a nice thing because nobody wants to spend more money. But bear in mind, 15 years ago, pheasants were £20, £25 maybe, and now people are happy to spend upwards of £45 on pheasants. And cartridges have increased a bit, but the game has changed. And that's part of what's got us here. You know, over the last 30 years, we've about doubled what game we've released. That's a large amount. More people shoot, more birds are shot, more ground is shot over. The game has changed fundamentally, and we need to find a source for that. I even saw people saying, well, why don't we just feed the pheasants to dogs or fish? I think, by the way, that opinion is utterly abhorrent, and you probably want to go and check yourself. The concept, I think, of shooting game for us to eat is wonderful, and shooting it and all the other fringe benefits come with it, conservation, the enjoyment of a day out shooting is wonderful. However, if you're shooting for that as the end result, you really need to check what you're doing shooting for. There's people saying that they can't make steel shot in this country, but they can make other shot compounds in this country. There is innovation that needs to happen, there's money that needs to be invested, and unfortunately throughout a lot of these changes this year has shown us that those who adapt have survived well, those who do not adapt do not. And I would hate to see any British cartridge manufacturers go out of business, I really would. I'm not really wishing any of that on anybody. But to think that stuff will stay the same for all of your life is ignorant. There's also something to say that within the gun trade, certainly, there's been rumours for probably 2 or 3 years before the voluntary lead statement came out, that we would be losing lead at some point. This is not new news to anybody in the trade, in the profession. However, it seems that cartridge manufacturers perhaps have just been happy doing what they were doing, and they have all made certain things, but it's taken this to really push them over the edge. I don't know. On that note, I got a statement from Holts Cartridge that I will read to you now. Holts Cartridge say, in line with the cartridge manufacturers' joint statement issued in February 2020, we are all working towards lead-free ranges. Hull's initial offerings with biodegradable wadding will be ready for this game season, which they are launching very soon, which is very exciting. However, there are limitations in the commercial supply chain which prevent an immediate switch. Hull have, of course, been manufacturing steel shot loads with standard plastic wadding for foreign markets for many years. They're very capable, and to be fair, making steel shot cartridges with plastic wads, most of these guys could switch very quickly. However, we are not looking for plastic wads. In fact, we are looking to not have plastic wads, which is the change of both things at once is the difficulty. However, the statement from the National Gamekeepers Association doesn't care about plastic wads, interestingly. So as I said before, it's an interesting thing, and when you actually do some fag packet maths that, we released 57 million game birds estimated in 2016, the estimates are wildly different, somewhere between 30 million and 57 million, but nobody really knows. Let's say there's an average of a 30% return, 17.1 million game birds shot a year. That firstly is a huge amount of birds to go into the market, to enter the food chain, and these people are trying to find buyers for those, which is not a difficulty. However, it is a difficulty if they don't want to buy them because they're shot with lead. Interestingly, that's 1.5 million kilos of lead conservatively shot off into the environment. And suddenly you can see that when that is the case, certainly when you read some of the scientific papers on the subject, that there is perhaps an environmental issue there with that lead. Just a thought, that's all. I'm not saying that I know the answers. However, when you say it like that, that does make you go, that's a lot of lead with no repercussions, but that you think may have no repercussions. So limiting that would not be a bad thing. I don't know. I've spent the last year trying to get my head around this and get on board with it. And to be fair, I was fairly on board with it from the start. I think this is a time to embrace change. Things change. This is just another era of shooting, as we'll cover a bit later. Anyway, this is what I spoke about with Simon Reinhold. Is this the end of shooting?
No, of course it's not the end of shooting. I mean, we're going to have to adapt to what the bowling that comes down the pitch over the next few years, and there will be developments coming to the market that are already in the pipeline. We've already seen quite a few coming to the market. Shooting has always changed. It has always developed. It has always progressed from muzzle loaders to breech loaders, from hammer guns to hammerless ejectors, from black powder to nitro powder. This is just another change in that long history of the sport that we all know and love. It will take some adaptation. We are going to have to learn how to shoot steel and how to get the best out of it, but it's certainly not the end of the sport.
Is it the end of high bird shooting?
High bird shooting is going to have to adapt the way they present birds in the more mountainous parts of the country. Yes, it's going to have to adapt to the limitations of the steel that we currently have. That does not mean to say that some of the home loading wildfowlers are getting performance out of steel cartridges that capped as to what they can. The speeds and the momentums, there are legal limits that they cannot go beyond. Those restrictions don't apply to home loaders, and they are getting an extra level of performance that would suit the 65, 60-yard specialist bird shooter. Now, you can't those I'll just caveat that with a little bit, if I may. You can't buy those on the open market. You can't pay someone to load those cartridges for you because it's illegal to sell them, but it is legal for them to load them themselves. So we may have to see a change. The proof house may have to consider a change in the upper limits of high performance steel to bring us more in line with the American cartridge manufacturers and Sami, who get a higher level of performance out of their steel cartridges.
Why do you think there's such an aversion to not steel, not lead cartridges? Just price?
It primarily comes down to price, yes. I mean, those who've shot it tell me that TSS, tungsten super shot, it performs at another level above lead. It is better than lead.
Really expensive.
it is
but
eye-bleedingly expensive.
really good. Like, you know, you're looking at what, £2.50 a shot?
Yeah, something like that. Now, if you're a 410 shooter and you like shooting your expensive 410 at game, you are probably going to have to consider TSS as your future. Other than that, you're probably going to have to put down your 410 until for another 5 or 6 years, because it will take the cartridge manufacturers. I'm content that I'm going to have to wait. Tungsten super shot, yeah, it's a wallet tempting experience, and hopefully the price will be mitigated by just the popularity of it in the future, because it will be an option, the only option for some calibers. And there are new developments happening in alloys as well. Now, we haven't seen them to test them in the UK market yet, but alternative shot, or blue shot, as I think Bioammo call it, that is an amalgam of 4 different metals, some of which we've seen before, at a price point that's halfway between lead and bismuth. So
yeah, I mean, it's under £500 a thousand. It's not killer.
Yeah, it's not. It's a viable price point, that one. So that is something that we're going to have to experiment with again to find how we get the best out of it as well.
Is this the end of old English guns?
No, I don't believe it is. As I understand it, the Proof House are currently conducting tests on Damascus barrels to find out what the Europeans consider standard steel through Damascus and less than half choke absolutely fine. It's not the guidance that's currently issued by the Proof House, and they, as I said, as I understand it, they are conducting tests to see whether that guidance needs to be revised. So yes, for now, we're recommending bismuth. We will offer a barrel health check here at Holts to allow you to understand exactly what your choke is, understand your wall thickness, understand your chamber length, because you need an expert opinion when it comes to those things. You can't just stick a little key ring choke tube in the end to establish what your gun is choked at. That's not how it works. You need to get a proper gunsmith or gun shop to get a bore gauge down it to find out. So the Europeans are quite comfortable shooting their Old English guns with standard steel and light loads. It remains to be seen whether the Proof House will start recommending that is possible for us too.
What is your overall feeling personally on this?
It's been coming. It's been coming since the ban on the foreshore with wildfowling, to be honest with you. And my personal opinion, having worked for BASC for a decade, is that BASC successfully pushed this back for a good 15 years. And now the time has come where we have to face what many of us in the trade regarded as the inevitable move away from lead. So it's not ideal. It does affect my particular passion. I'm taking a pragmatic view at the end of the day. I don't like seeing misinformation from people who should know better, who are rabid supporters of lead, saying that steel shot's rubbish and that it can't do this, it can't do that, it can't do the other. Try and find a professional opinion that isn't tainted by just a revisionist, just looking back at the last 40 years of shooting. We got to look forward. So my approach is a pragmatic one. It's not ideal, this, but it is what we are dealt with, and we have to deal with it like adults.
Is there any point resisting?
As of the government's announcement of a consultation, I would say the resistance is we have had 20 years worth of. Well, yeah, without wishing to quote Star Trek or whatever it was, but what we now need to do is we cannot stand there trying to hold back the tide. What we need to do is get involved in this consultation properly and with sensible voices to make the time frame work for us. The time frame has been altered by the game dealers announcement yesterday that they won't take any further game shot with lead as of the 1st of July 2022. That has shifted the gear, and we may not be in the place we want it to be by the time 2022 comes around. So all hands to the pump now in the industry to try and get the market satisfied with enough products for us to go game shooting season 22-23. Now,
alternatively, you can process the birds yourself if shot with lead.
Yes, you can. Very important to be able to differentiate what's going into the market that has shot with non-toxic, shot with toxic, because should be this fruit product no longer contains a toxic metal. That should be the story we are pushing. If we do anything to compromise that by selfish actions, then we only have ourselves to blame, and that is something I'm concerned about. It's coming back to the resistance point. It's not about resistance now. It's about engaging with the consultation to allow us to meet the next 4, 5, 6 years on our own terms, so that we are better placed for over the next 30 years for the future of shooting.
Until laser guns come out.
Well, you might be privy to technological advances that I'm not, Johnny.
Well, I'm more accepting of technological advances like barrels like this. No, thank you very, very much. Is there any other sort of closing statements or final words you'd like to have?
No, I mean, I would say it's very important for people to find out, to go out and experiment with steel shot. Get a barrel health check first. Go out and experiment with different cartridges at different range, different chokes. Try different things. Experiment with your type of shooting and see what works for you. There is no substitute for it.
Thank you very, very much for your time, Simon.
Pleasure. Thank you.
The pressure here really isn't on the shooters. I would say, go as far as to say that probably 75 or 80% of game shooters this will not affect particularly. Most birds that are shot are in range of steel. My personal experience of shooting game with steel is that it does work just fine. It does, however, work very differently, and if you're expecting birds to die in the same way and for it to perform the same, you're wrong. It doesn't. But getting your head around that and sort of embracing that change, think about when you buy a new gun. It takes you a year to get used to it. There's no reason that it's a hard thing. You need to spend the year you shooting with steel to get used to it. However, I understand that up to this point, and this season hasn't been the perfect season, that we've got another season of lead. All I'm saying is embrace change. There's no point fighting this. It was made quite obvious the other day with the UK REACH, the chemical sort of thing, that the chances of there being a blanket ban on lead use within a couple of years might be high anyway, and that does involve clay shooting, but we're not going to talk about that now. From the perspective of game shoots, again, many of these it will not affect. What it will mean is policing your guns, not this season, but the season after, with what they're using. Obviously, there will be the people that go out and buy a pallet of lead and pretend they're just going to use that forevermore. However, that will probably cause us way more harm than good, and cause your game dealer more harm than good. And, there needs to be an attitudinal shift there for those people that are even considering that. From game shoots, they need to police it, they need to embrace it, maybe change some of the drives to make that work. On some of the high bird shoots, that might even involve allowing guns to shoot with semi-automatics. For the time being, whilst you can shoot those high birds with 3-inch and 3.5-inch magnums, perhaps shooting with a semi-automatic would not be a terrible idea for that. Just a thought. Thinking that 15, 20 years ago, when I got into shooting, over and unders in the game shooting field were frowned upon, and now you rarely see a side-by-side. The real person this affects is cartridge companies. They need to sort their supply chains out and spend a lot on research and development at a time where spending a lot on research and development is not ideal. And to be fair, a lot of them have spent a huge amount already. So yeah, there are alternatives and there is a future. But before we end, we're going to spend a bit of time with Nick Horton, who's going to talk us through the true difference between standard steel and superior steel shot cartridges, because there's a lot of confusion there. Before I do that, my closing statement will be this. Bismuth exists. It is expensive, but for those who shoot a bit of game, it won't increase your bill that much. Tungsten is the best high bird cartridge there is, but it is very expensive. However, reallocating some of your budget and things changing, that is the way it is. And if you want to shoot high birds, it's better for the job anyway. It's just something expensive. Steel shot is getting better. It's got so much better. Yes, there's a way to go, but the only way they're going to actually get there is if we support it financially. So buy some steel cartridges. Let these manufacturers know you're supporting them. Anyway, Nick Horton. Does steel kill well?
Yes, it does. Kills as well as lead. And an observation in respect of that, some work that one of the major shooting associations did many years ago now said that most people struggle to hit birds with lead beyond 35 yards.
Is this the end of shooting?
No, it's the beginning of a new chapter.
Of course, it would be wrong, Nick, to not have you in a video where we're talking about non-toxic shots. So, Nick, please talk me through the basics.
The basics. Okay, I'm going to do this with a notepad and a pen in hand. And rather than try and do this from memory, what I'm actually going to do is to read from the CIP regulations in respect of steel shot. So this is literally straight from the horse's mouth. To put CIP, in French, the Conseil International de Proof, is, as its name suggests, a European body who was formed back in the 1920s, largely by the Liège gun trade, and it is effectively the European equivalent of the former two British proof houses. It has no connection whatsoever with the EU. It predates it by many, many years. And what they say about steel shot in terms of what you need to know from a safety point is as follows. As we know, there are two types of steel shot cartridge, standard steel and high performance. And this is one of those things that will come as a surprise to many who've not actually troubled to read this document, when it says standard steel cartridges can be fired through any gun proved to the standard level, i.e. most nitro-proved guns, proved to at least 930 bar. What's 930 bar in tons? If, like me, you haven't gone metro, is that 3 1/4?
Oh, I thought it was, yeah, that's probably less than 3 1/4, isn't it? 930 bar?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter here.
No. and I've actually underlined this, and through any choke, and I'll say that again, standard steel can be fired through any choke.
I'm going to caveat it straight away by saying there is a risk of bulging if you put it through any choke.
Yes, and we will come on to some of the other sort of caveats, bearing in mind that this is primarily directed towards substantially built guns of relatively modern manufacture. Older guns, there are slightly different potential consequences which are mentioned as we go through the document, but it goes on to say high performance steel cartridges should always be marked as such on the box, we know that to be true, and should only be fired through guns that have passed steel shot proof. These guns should be proofed to at least 1320 bar, be stamped with steel shot, and have a fleur-de-lis proof mark to prove it. And again, another one of those comments that will come as a surprise to many. Most high-performance steel can be fired through any choke, but it's recommended not to use choke greater than a half for shot sizes of BB, which is 4.1 millimeter or larger. And my advice would be definitely to pay attention to that aspect of it. As you know, in the experimental work that we've been doing, 2 or 3 Spanish side-by-sides, a couple of which have been used with standard steel shot, which have shown no effect whatsoever. The one which is not steel proofed, but has had high performance cartridges of a larger shot size through it, is in fact exhibiting ring bulges at the end of one of the barrels.
Which are purely aesthetic, as much as they also void the proof of the gun.
Yes.
There is no danger to continued use of that gun once it has ring bulged, the pressure point has been relieved, correct?
Yes.
Exactly. So, and I speak to a few chaps over in Denmark where they've been using steel for a very long time, is they see a ring bulge as a fairly standard thing on a gun.
Yes.
They don't seem to care at all, whereas obviously we do.
Yeah, and the Americans are very much the same. If you're going to use tight choke and large steel shot, you're going to get a ring bulge. Live with it.
Yes, or own a gun that is capable of shooting it. Just try and think of a few. Fab arm, you can fire high performance steel through a full choke. Those chokes and barrels are immensely well made. Longthorn, Breeder, Perazzi, modern Perazzis now, you can fire through fixed full chokes. Longthorn and Breeder have been doing it for most of their lives.
Yes.
There is a lot of good quality guns where you don't have to pay attention to that rule if you don't want, because the guns are built to such a standard. However, obviously be aware that a lot of guns are not and will ring bulge if you choose to put very large loads through very thick chokes.
Yeah, and again, in passing, one of the things that we discovered with going back to my stable of Dago specialities, two AYAs and a Yugata chair. The hardness of the AYAs is significantly greater than the Yugata chair, which, as we...
It's no surprise.
No,
but yes.
Going sort of right back to the beginning, we just described the Yugata chair as, by comparison, being made of butter. It is very susceptible to this sort of thing because it is significantly softer.
Gun quality has a lot of bearing, as does, if you take your chokes out, the quality of the choke taking outery, as we've discovered.
As we've discovered, yes. But again, just to move on, again I'll read this verbatim. As a result of its hardness and the typical plastic wad, steel does have the potential to cause some choke expansion, as we've just discussed, particularly in older traditional lightweight guns. Come on to that. Care is also needed when shooting steel, as it can ricochet more than lead, and eye protection may be sensible.
Buy stocks in Pillar and Zeiss.
Yes, I have to say, whilst not wishing to in any way disagree with that, logic dictates that would be the case. I've spent the last, since, I don't know, we're getting on for 20 years now, shooting steel on the foreshore, where there's lumps of flint, there's lots of concrete, on parts of the foreshore. There's water. I would have thought that if ricochet was the potential problem that it's made out to be, other than in a strictly health and safety, be aware of this kind of scenario. I would have witnessed it. My suggestion would be that I would have had some experience of it, and collectively I don't, and most wildfowlers that I know don't either.
I think this will be different for those who are shooting flight ponds, who maybe stood either sides of a large pond. People shooting rabbits or ground game, it will certainly affect quite a lot.
Yes.
And if you're shooting, around farm buildings, maybe.
Potentially.
But I don't see trees ricocheting shot that often.
No.
Ground does, and water does.
Yeah, and whatever the future holds, if steel shot translates to clay shooting, obviously the way in which rabbit clays or battus or whatever you call them are arranged will have to be
slightly
looked at, possibly changed slightly. But again, I don't see that as a major issue. What I'm not going to do, unless you disagree with me, is to go through the next table of figures.
No, the next page has a much better translation in simple words than reading out a table of figures.
Indeed. And there's nothing in particular in there. So there are some notes that are worth onwardly transmitting. This first paragraph talks about momentum.
I think this is what is probably... It's the most confusing, but also the most interesting point on steel versus standard versus high-performance steel, and that is that there is a key difference in momentum. Momentum being velocity multiplied by load weight. So,
are you reading that?
Yes. This exceeds standard steel shot limits, which is 12 newtons. Meaning you could have a very heavy load going very slowly, and that would be a standard proof, or you could have a very lightweight cartridge going very fast. That would be standard proof, but you cannot have both without falling into the high performance steel bracket. That's as much as we can say on it, really.
Yes, and at that point I'm going to put a line through that, because that is extremely technically complex.
Well, get yourself a calculator, and you can, if you're a home loader, figure out what is acceptable within limits. Otherwise, trust manufacturers.
Yes, and I think it's fair to say at this stage, and this is an ongoing effort, the British shooting industry, which includes all of the main shooting organisations, gun trade, etc., are all applying pressure to the international proof authorities to have these figures reviewed, because obviously one of the main things that's holding back the efficiency of steel shot, if you care to describe it as that, are the upper limits that are imposed by these equations.
I remember Alan saying that he loads up his big bores at 1,700 feet per second with big loads of BBs and will kill 80-yard ducks without
Absolutely.
thinking about it. I would like to see that as an off-the-shelf product in this country,
Yeah.
whereas you can buy very similar things from America at the moment.
Yes. So on to the next one. Number 2 says standard steel shot cannot be larger than 3.25 millimetre, i.e. English number 3.
There's a lot of confusion on this fact alone, I'm aware, and I know that a lot of people are asking for there to be millimetric measurements on boxes, making it very clear what it is and isn't ongoing.
Yes, and again, just to sort of put a bit of a handle onto that, this 3.25 number 3 shot size is again a direct lift from the CIP regs. Where the confusion has arisen in this country is that there are no standard sizes for lead shot in the UK. So a number 3 shot at that measurement may well, on one of the English lead shot scales, have been technically a number 4. And of course, because it uses the figure number 4, and if we just go back for a moment to the previous page, when we looked at this figure of 4 millimetres in terms of choke, that is where the confusion is just compounded. It is complicated beyond reason, and it needs sorting out at some point, particularly if this is to move forward at any stage. So that talks about any of the limits for standard steel are exceeded, then that cartridge becomes high performance. We know that should be fired only through a steel shot proof gun. Notice also that the limits on pressure, velocity and momentum for high performance steel shot should not be exceeded, full stop. But unless you're home loading, that won't apply to you.
No.
And here, this is one of the caveats that we talked about earlier. For traditional lightweight game guns, the CIP recommends chokes generally no greater than half, whilst the British proof authorities recommend no more than quarter choke. The quarter choke bit has kind of got lost in the tallying. I'm told, and I stand to be corrected, that the British proof authorities' selection of quarter choke was rather steel shot many years ago. Don't know anything about it.
Well, the thing is there's a blanket over lightweight game guns, and that can be, a very thin barrel or a very thick barrel, and nobody really knows because all cybersides are lumped in the same bucket.
Yes.
Yes, carry on.
So, and I'm absolutely not criticising them, but really what you'll have to do is look at the gun that you're intending to use and form an educated opinion as to which of these categories it falls in and what you should be doing.
Indeed. Beware at the same time that bismuth still exists, new compounds are existing. This is not the end of your lightweight game gun if you don't want to use steel. There are other options.
No.
And if you don't shoot an obscene amount, it's not going to affect your pocket that badly. If you do shoot an obscene amount, you can maybe contemplate either having a new barrel made for your gun or spending a bit more on ammunition or shooting a few less birds. There's options out there and they're all available to you.
Absolutely. So on to the next one.
I'm going to skip too quickly because it's slightly related. Do not use steel shot in any Damascus or twist barrel guns. Abide by this rule. However, be aware that there are plenty of other countries out there shooting steel through Damascus steel guns, and they are absolutely fine.
Yes, many Danes have been shooting steel, which is, to the best of my knowledge, slightly hotter than the steel that you can get in this country, and they've been shooting it through old Damascus barrel guns with no problems whatsoever. And I think
But a bit like our series on you shooting guns that are not steel proof with high performance steel, don't do it at home.
No. and I think also one of the issues which I'd be grateful for an insight into this, if anyone out there knows what the answer is. Damascus, because a lot of Damascus was shipped to the States in the late 19th and early 20th century, and much of it was utter rubbish.
Yeah, twist steel
The old-
junk.
Literal rubbish that was dumped on the American market, and the American propensity for putting as heavy a load, in fact, even extending the chambers on a gun so you can put more shot through it, yeehaw, has meant that the American market has got a really twitchy view of Damascus in terms of its strength, which most people who are in the know in this country don't share at all. Damascus is actually very strong, and of course when it does, in the event of it failing, Damascus usually simply unwinds rather than bursting.
I mean, neither is preferable.
No.
Which takes us on to the last point, that not complying with any of these rules risks damaging to your shotgun. I like to say guns don't blow up. They do. Guns definitely blow up. I've seen pictures of guns blowing up. I mean, it's not tannerite sort of level of explosions, but there is a potential for them blowing up, but it is not from using steel.
No. And scratch barrels are normally prevented by robust wads, but guns can suffer choke expansion, bulging. We've explored the whole wad thing, all sorts of interesting developments going on in that respect.
This is usually barely visible and does not affect performance or safety, but may prevent the gun being accepted for reproving at a later date. So the thing with choke bulging, it is usually very, very minimal, to the point that you can barely see it apart from really close inspection. It doesn't come out like a trumpet, but it will need fixing and correcting and then reproving before you can sell that gun. So don't be buying a cheap side-by-side, putting inappropriate loads through it, bulging the chokes, and then getting angry without then having to get those bulges fixed and changed.
Yeah. Yes.
Alternatively, buy a modern gun.
Buy a modern gun. Absolutely. Most modern over and unders in particular, many are now steel proofed. Most of them, certainly guns by the larger reputable manufacturers, made in the last 20 years and beyond.
You can put most things through them and they'll be absolutely
yes,
fine.
Absolutely. It's really only if you're using a very old English gun with thin barrels, or inappropriate cartridges through a gun, which is certainly not recommended, that you are likely to have any problems. Otherwise, comply with the regulations as we've just described them, and you won't have any problems with steel whatsoever.